Hello, everybody. Oh my God, my hair's not out. Need my hair out. Get this back to normal. Now back to business. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. I'm back, baby. So good to be back with the blue. This is my 20th episode. I don't know how I made it to 20 episodes. 20 episodes. Been doing this for 20 weeks. 20 weeks. Freaking insane. For those of you who have stayed with me for these 20 episodes, stay with me for 20 more. Oh, I'm so proud of myself. For the 20th episode, we are going to a part of the world where I believe some of the strongest women live. Africa, where one of the most powerful and influential rulers fought fiercely against the Portuguese and African slave trade. Nzinga Mbande. Let's get started. Okay. All right, so like I said before, we are in Africa, so words are going to be hard. You know the drill.
I am here to help.
Let's get into it. Nzinga Anna de Sezuna Mbande was born in 1583 into the royal family of Ndongo, which was the capital of Kabasa. The people of this kingdom are called Mbundu, which are Bantu people, who are an ethno-linguistic group of about 400 distinct groups that are natives to over 24 countries spread all over Central, Southeast, and Southern Africa that consists of about 600 languages. The Bantu people lived on the high plateau just north of the Kwanza River in modern-day Angola. Now, who the flip is this name? You know what? I'm going to have the robot say that one. She was the daughter of
Angola Kalambo Kia Kasenda.
And her mother was
Kangala Cornum.
who was one of his slave wives and his favorite. Love that. You know what? I'm just going to call her Jinga. I need to not say all of that. So we're going to call her Jinga. This is Jinga now. How Jinga got her name is different. She got her name because her mother had a very difficult birth. Jinga was breech, where the baby comes feet or butt first. Ow. Her face was upturned and the umbilical cord was wrapped around her neck. With this, they gave her the name Nzinga, which comes from Mbundu verb
Kajinga,
which means twist or turn. Some believed that children born into royal families that survived difficult births believed to have some sort of a spiritual gift and saw the birth as a signal that they would grow to be a powerful and proud person. So with Jinga's unusual birth, everyone agreed that this foretold of an unusual life for her. Or more simply, when her father held her, he saw her future of how she would twist and turn her enemies, fighting for her country's freedom. One of the two. Jinga had 3 siblings, Kambu or Lady Barbara. Hi, kitty. Come on. No, you're bumping the mic. Come on, up we go. Fungi or Fungi. I don't want to call her Fungi because I just think of fungi, so we're gonna call her Fungi. Just sounds funner. Or Lady Grace and Mbande. Again, if I'm mispronouncing things, I'm sorry. At the time Jinga was born, her and neighboring kingdoms were crawling with white people, colonialism, and the Atlantic slave trade was well underway and tearing Africa apart. Now, before we move on, Africans also participated in the African slave trade. I'm not glossing over that. We're just focusing on the white people in this one, all right? We're just focusing on that right now. The Portuguese had first arrived in Ndongo in 1575 when they established a trading post with Ndongo's northern rival, the Kingdom of Congo. Now, there was peace for several years between Ndongo and Portugal, but when faced with military pressure from Portugal and Congo, not only was territory being seized by burning villages and taking hostages, the usual, but large numbers of slaves were being taken. An estimated 50 1,000 slaves. The Ndongo rallied against the Portuguese and defeated them at the Battle of Lucala in 1590. However, at that point, much of the kingdom's territory had been lost. With all this going on, of course, it eroded the power of the current king. Okay. Some Ndongans even sided with the Portuguese. So by the time Nzinga's father became king in 1593, the kingdom had been devastated by a decade of war and the power of the king wasn't all that great. Now, to his credit, Ndongo did try to fix the rifts with diplomacy and negotiations, open warfare, anything that he could think of. But things didn't exactly improve. If anything, it just got worse. But that's a different story.
Elsa's a loaf on the couch.
She's a loaf of bread right here. I like it. Nzinga's father became king when she was 10 years old, and she was clearly favored by her father. Why? Well, since she wasn't heir to the throne, she wasn't a threat. So he was free to lavish her with affection and attention. Duh, since she's not a he, and in that case is not a threat to his throne, so she is A-okay. The attention Nzinga received from her father included involving her in his duties, attending legal and war councils, rituals that were vital to their culture, and she even received military training to become a warrior. Nzinga was also taught by visiting Portuguese missionaries to read and write in Portuguese. Even though Nzinga was not only a girl, but also not a child from his main wife, made the fact that she received all this attention and training was very unusual. Let me explain. Normally, it was unheard of for any king to lavish any son so as to not risk jealousy between not only the sons, but the wives, some of whom came from very powerful families. Now, daughters are different. For one, they're not seen as a direct throne competition, and two, Nzinga was just kind of a baddie. Everyone agreed she was special. Nzinga outperformed her brothers in basically everything, including with a battle axe, which was the royal weapon of choice. Which, if it looks like Thor's axe, I'm down. Nzinga was an Amazon and a warrior. Growing up, she wore men's clothes and was considered the best politician in the country. I love all of this. She left. She lived large and took every chance she could to emasculate her brothers. She supposedly said, quote, "Boys, they're such simple creatures, so thirsty for their father's affection, so easily humiliated," end quote. She's not all that wrong. Here is where things get complicated. In 1617, Ndongo died when his own men got tired of everything going wrong, so they ambushed and murdered him. Cool. Now, the king-making process in Africa is complex and makes the English version look simple as 2 + 2 = 4. As with all monarchs, the heir had to be of noble lineage, which, if we know anything about any king ever in the history of ever, there tends to be a large pool of potential candidates because a king can never commit to just one woman. I'm not gonna say anything. Charles. However, with the Ndongo, the heir had to be elected by specially designated court officials in a multi-level qualification process that normally ended in a peaceful transfer of power. Blew my mind when I deciphered that. But with all of the chaos going on, Mbande, the apparent heir, kind of just did his own thing. He worked the political upheaval to his advantage and staged essentially a coup in the capital before the normal electors could assemble. This brilliant plan of his also included making sure he had no male relatives who could interfere. How did he do this? Simple. He killed his half-brother's family, many prominent members of the court, Nzinga's newborn son, then ordered the sterilization of Nzinga, Kambu, and Fungi. Once he was satisfied they wouldn't produce any male heirs, he let his sisters live. You know, just to be nice. God. According to some historians, Nzinga was singled out by her brother because of all the affection she got from their father. So this obviously put a rival between her brother. So that's one of the reasons why he killed her first and only son and then forcibly sterilized her. I don't know how much I buy that, but I don't know how sibling rivalry works. I think that's taking it a bit too extreme in my eyes. So, in fear for her life, Nzinga fled to the kingdom of Matamba. If I pronounced that right, I'm so proud of myself.
Matamba.
I am so good. Having gotten a substantial amount of power, Matamba, Njanga, Mambudu, Fufu no Kwaka. Having gotten a substantial amount of power, Mbande vowed to continue the fight against the Portuguese, but he lacked any kind of military skill. However, he did form an alliance with Mbangala, a neighboring kingdom. By 1621, the Portuguese had made massive military gains and were pursuing Mbande on all sides. If I mispronounce his name, I'm so sorry. For some reason, my mouth just can't keep it up. Increasing violence, expanding the Atlantic slave trade, and kidnapping several high members of the royal family. In early 1622, Portuguese Luanda governor
João Correia de Souza
invited Mbande to a peace conference. Sensing an opening for negotiations, for some reason, he contacted Nzinga, who at this point was 39, estranged from her brother, living in a different kingdom, and had been forcibly sterilized by her brother. I can only imagine the conversation went like this. Hey sis, how you doing? Good, good. You look good, by the way. I love what you've done with your hair. Hey, remember the whole killing your son and sterilizing you thing? That was crazy, huh? Well, can we just kind of like forget about all that? Because I'm kind of getting my butt whooped by the Portuguese and was wondering if you could be my ambassador to represent me to the Portuguese in Luanda. I mean, you are the best fit candidate for this position because not only do you have royal blood in you, but you also speak fluent Portuguese, and I just think it would be really neat if you could help your brother out. What you think? I can only imagine the conversation he must have had with her. Ooh, kissing her feet. Not gonna cut it. We gotta come back up? Okay. Find a comfy spot. Right here, really, right where my arm is. Now, surprisingly, Nzinga agreed. I don't know what the brother must have said, but she arrived in Luanda and was well aware of how awkward the situation was diplomatically. But she also recognized that all those years of being by her father's side, fine-tuning her skills, pushing through the pain and degradation, that this was her moment. Her moment to shine. Her moment to show that she and the Ndongo people were a force to be reckoned with. It also gave her the chance to totally humiliate her brother. No, she's not bitter. Here's what Nzinga did when she arrived. She showed up in Luanda in traditional clothing, which was unusual for her position. You see, most dignitaries from Ndongo would wear Portuguese clothing as a way of placing themselves on the same level. But Nzinga felt that wearing Portuguese clothing would be proving to them that her people were below them. People described Nzinga as being draped in expensive fabric, colorful feathers decorating her elaborate hairstyle, and dripping in priceless jewels. I mean, if you've ever seen Black Panther or any kind of African clothing, we can only imagine what she must have looked like. Oh. Reportedly, during negotiations, the governor tried to humiliate her by having her sit on the floor while he was perched in a pretty velvet chair. I'm gonna hold my tongue. But in response, Nzinga, don't know if this makes her cool or not, ordered one of her servants to get on their hands and knees, and Nzinga sat on them. I don't know if they gave her a chair after seeing that, but she must have been like, me? It's on the floor? Mm-mm. Harold? And she sits on it. It's not funny. I'm laughing because how absurd it is that he just didn't give her a freaking chair. Moving on. Nzinga adopted a flattery diplomatic style compared to her brother's belligerent diplomatic styles. As ambassador, Nzinga promised the Portuguese to end hostilities, allowed Portuguese slave traders inside Ndongo, and offered to return escaped slaves in her brother's army to them. In return, Nzinga demanded that the Portuguese remove forts built inside Ndongo territory and that they would no longer pay tribute to Portugal. When the Portuguese questioned Nzinga's commitment to peace, she offered to be publicly baptized and agreed to study the Christian catechism. She adopted the name Dona Ana de Souza in honor of her ordained godparents, which was the governor
João Correia de Souza,
and his wife, Ana de Silvia. In late 1622, a peace treaty was agreed upon and Nzinga returned to Cabaça in triumph. I'm gonna rush through this part because it's long and complicated and everything's already been complicated, so this is very, very, very simply put. Despite Nzinga's success with the Portuguese, peace between Ndongo and Mbangla collapsed after many defeats, and Mbande and the royal family was driven out of court, putting him in exile, and some Mbanglas started to gain power. The governor wanted to do something with the treaty, but refused to help the Ndongo against the Mbangla until the king took back Cabaça and was baptized. I know this is confusing, and trust me, my brain and my mouth is mispronouncing things. Just stick with me. To his credit, Mbande did retake Cabaça in 1623 and took little steps towards Christianity, but in the end, he didn't trust the Portuguese. Kinda don't blame him. With increasing power, Nzinga warned her brother that being baptized wouldn't be a good idea and would offend some of his people. Plus, the Portuguese were already starting to back out of the treaty by refusing to leave the fortresses and were doing raids, stealing things, and taking slaves. And by 1624, Mbande had become depressed and was forced to surrender many duties, and in that same year, Mbande made clear that Nzinga would be his successor, and after that, died of either suicide or poisoning. I actually made it through that. Y'all, this is probably the hardest pronouncing video I have ever done, and if I'm mispronouncing all of these words, I'm so sorry. Nzinga did a lavish funeral for her brother, preserved his remains in a traditional reliquary called a
Mesquite,
so Nzinga could consult him as an ancestor, thus making Nzinga as the spiritual heir of Ndongo. After the funeral, she quickly worked to establish her new position as ruler. Records are unclear as to what her title was, either Queen or Lady of Angola. What is clear is that she was the leader of her people and refused to submit to colonial rule. She had one little problem though. Her 7-year-old nephew, who was under the guardianship of an Mbangala war chief named Kasa. To solve this problem, she offered a marriage proposal to Kasa. They married, and after the marriage, Nzinga had her nephew killed. It's assumed in Nzinga's eyes that this was kind of a revenge killing for her own murdered son. We're just gonna roll with it. When Nzinga ascended the throne, her kingdom was being pressured by the Portuguese and neighboring kingdoms. Nzinga tried to re-engage negotiations with the Portuguese, but they refused to negotiate, and tensions between Nzinga and, I'm just gonna call him J.O., began. It all began when Nzinga asked for Kachigi coast to be returned. Kachigi coasts are subservient slaves that are traditionally owned by Ndongo royalty. They were living in Portuguese territory and the return of them was in the original treaty. Joa refused and demanded that escaped Portuguese slaves that were serving in Nzinga's army be returned first. He also demanded that Nzinga be a subject, but we'll really call it a slave, to the King of Portugal, Philip IV, and pay tribute. Nzinga essentially said, get bent. That alone started a downward spiral. And to further tick off the Portuguese and weaken their colonialization, Nzinga sent messengers to encourage Mbande slaves to flee the plantations and join her kingdom, not only depleting their income, but also their manpower. When they complained about the escapees, Nzinga essentially said, I'll give them back if you abide by the treaty and return my escaped slaves, but your slaves are not in my kingdom. Nzinga's actions actually worked, and many nobles or sobas joined her, strengthening her position and made the Portuguese fear that an uprising from the Mbande was close. Now, this is just weird. I mean, it makes sense, but it's still weird. I'm telling you guys, so many of these robot enhancers is not from a lack of trying. Yeah, you're funny. In late 1625, the Portuguese sent soldiers to protect a noble who had broken ties with Nzinga, and he opposed having a woman rule Ndongo, and he himself was a descendant in the royal family. We're not 100% sure. I couldn't fully confirm that. When Nzinga found out about this, she sent her own warriors to stop this revolt, but was defeated. So she tried to petition the Portuguese to stop supporting Harry. I'm just gonna call him Harry because his name looked like Harry. They saw this petition as a delaying tactic and recognized Harry as the king of Ndongo and declared war with Nzinga on March 15th, 1626. With the threat of invasion, Nzinga gathered her army and went to a group of islands in the Kwanza River. These islands were far beyond the reach of the Portuguese. Nzinga offered sanctuary to runaway slaves and Portuguese-trained African soldiers. With these new soldiers, they adopted a new form of a military unit called Colombo, where youths relinquished family ties and were raised communally in militias. In 1627, after forming alliances with former rival kingdoms, Nzinga led an army against the Portuguese. After many battles, Nzinga and her army were defeated and had to retreat. But during the retreat, she had to abandon her army. The Portuguese really didn't make a big fuss about that because they mainly wanted to get their slaves back. Love this time in world history. Now, the Portuguese had their own setback when Harry died of smallpox. So they had to replace him with another Ndongo nobleman, Nangola Harry. I know it sounds like these names are just being freaking recycled. But this guy proved to be unpopular with the Ndongans, who saw him as a Portuguese puppet. But some nobles supported him. This started a rift between the nobles who supported the puppet king and those who supported Nzinga, which we're just going to call this guy the puppet king because I'm just going to get confused if I'm not already confused. In November of 1627, Nzinga again tried to negotiate by sending the Portuguese a peace offering and gift of 400 slaves and hinted that she was willing to become a subject for Philip IV. And she would pay tribute only if the Portuguese supported her rightful claim to the throne. But the Portuguese rejected the offer. Their counter offer was that Nzinga, this is so freaking weird, retire from public life, renounce her claim to the kingdom of Ndongo, submit to Puppet King as the rightful king, and just for good measure, beheaded her lead diplomat. I don't know either. This time, Nzinga essentially said, get double bent. These failing negotiations and war would go on for the next 30 years. Stubbornness. In 1629, Nzinga's camp was raided by the Portuguese, and her two sisters, Kambu and Fungi, were captured and forced to convert to Christianity. Nzinga sent a messenger to Kasanje, the leader of the... I'm just gonna put the robot in here. My mouth is just, it's too hard for me to do.
Imbangala.
War camp, begging him to take her and her army in. He agreed, but had some conditions. Nzinga was to dispose of her langa, which was a large belt that was carried by military leaders during war times, live by his traditions, and become his wife. Hey! No barks. Surprisingly again, Nzinga agreed, and she began to do intense training to become an Imbangala warrior. In her late 40s by this time, she was still kicking some serious butt. And after a few years, she became an Imbangala leader, establishing a new war camp and taking the name Ngala Nzinga something something something.
Ngolan Jinga Ngombi Enga.
Which roughly translates to Queen Nzinga, Master of Arms and Great Warrior. Which, I mean, that's pretty sick. With her new army, she invaded Matamba and redeclared herself its ruler. With her based there through the 1630s, she negotiated with the Portuguese again to release her sisters. But this time around, she would have a little bit of a boost. In 1641, the Netherlands came to Africa and seized Luanda from the Portuguese. Seeing an opportunity, Nzinga entered negotiations with the Dutch West India Company. Nzinga offered to open a slave trade with them. The Dutch agreed, and in 1647 assisted her in battles and victories against the Portuguese. Truly, somehow, Nzinga had connected with her sister, Fungi, and she became Nzinga's spy. And the new alliance with the Dutch was going well. But just when things were starting to look good for her, it all came crashing down. In 1647, Fungi's cover had been blown and they drowned her in retaliation. In 1648, the Dutch sensed that they couldn't defeat the Portuguese and had gone behind Nzinga's back and made a treaty with the Portuguese on August 24th, 1648, and in the following months, the Dutch left Central Africa. By this time, Nzinga is in her mid-60s, been essentially queen of a kingdom that she and her people were exiled from for the past 2.5 decades, fighting for her kingdom's independence. Her sister is now dead, and once again, she's back at the drawing board. Give a girl a break. Throughout the 1640s and 50s, Nzinga began to slowly adopt Christianity. This began in 1644 when her army captured a Portuguese priest. Then her expanded forces in Congo captured 2 Spanish Capuchins in 1648. Capuchins, or Order of Friars Minor Capuchin, is a religious order of Franciscan, which is a member of the Roman Catholic religion, friars within the Catholic Church. Now, unlike other European prisoners, Nzinga let the Capuchins roam the camp freely. One Spaniard,
Father Callisto, Zealots du Rees Mogo,
became a longtime resident of Nzinga's court and her personal secretary. With the Capuchins' rival, this gave Nzinga an idea. She sent requests to the Capuchin order to send more missionaries and for support against the Portuguese. She even began to gain relationships with diplomats in the Vatican. Heck yeah! She even got a letter from Pope Alexander VII in 1661 praising her efforts, calling her his daughter of Christ, and that he would pray for her country's victory and prosperities. By 1650, Nzinga and the Portuguese had been at war for almost 25 years and were just exhausted. Peace talks between the two started in 1651 and were mainly started by the Portuguese, who were facing pressure from its own war of independence against Spain. And Nzinga's recent conversion to Christianity helped a little bit too. Despite the differences, a treaty was agreed upon and signed in late 1658. Under the treaty, Nzinga agreed to surrender lands of her kingdom's west coast to Portugal, with the Lucala River becoming the new border, allow Portuguese traders inside Matamba, provide military assistance, and that Matamba pay tribute to Portugal, but that was never ratified. In return, Portugal agreed to surrender
Kituxila.
region to Nzinga, agreed to intervene if this guy or Puppet King attacked her, agreed to focus the slave trade market in Nzinga's capital, basically giving her a monopoly on the trade, and agreed to send permanent representatives to Nzinga's court. On October 12, 1656, after 27 years of capture, Kambu was released and reunited with her now 74-year-old sister, Nzinga. Reportedly, as soon as Nzinga saw her sister, she collapsed to the ground and began rubbing soil on herself, which is a custom for paying homage. After kissing her hands, kneeling, and dropping her head to the ground, the sisters embraced one another, too overcome with emotions to talk. In her final years, Nzinga attempted to rebuild her kingdom, establishing a unified kingdom that she would pass to her sister. Unfortunately, her home kingdom of Ndongo was ravaged by decades of war and had to be abandoned. So, Nzinga focused on Matamba. She developed Matamba as a trading power and strengthened her hold on the slave trade. Nzinga resettled former slaves on new lands, allowed women in her war camp to have children, which had been prohibited under Mbingala war customs, reformed the legal code of her kingdom, and established contact with European Christian rulers. She did this to hopefully certify Matamba as an internationally recognized Christian kingdom. As Nzinga aged, she began to worry about her successor. Fearing it could lead to a crisis, she appointed Kambu as her heir, going around the traditional Mbambandu election process. In October of 1663, Nzinga fell ill with an infection in her throat and became bedridden. In December of that same year, the infection had spread to her lungs. Nzinga Mbande died in the morning of December 7, 1663, in her sleep at the age of 81. She was buried with her hair styled in corals, pearls, and feathers with her crown. Her legs and arms were adorned with jewelry and an array of elephant hair, which was a symbol of royalty. Her body was then wrapped in two richly decorated cloths with velvet slippers on her feet. Then, in honor of her burial request, the attendants then replaced all her clothing and jewelry with a habit, crucifix, and a rosary, but left her hair and crown as is. This was a ceremonial dressing and redressing representing a type of middle ground for the two traditions Nzinga held close to her heart and had spent years navigating. Unfortunately, her death accelerated the Portuguese colonization and their slave trading operations. Today, Nzinga is remembered as the mother of Angola and is still honored throughout Africa as an incredible leader and woman. A major street in Luanda is named after her. A statue placed in
Kanaxigsi.
in 2002 was dedicated by President Santos to celebrate the 27th anniversary of independence. Angolan women are often married near the statue, but mainly on Thursdays and Fridays. I don't know why, but that's cool. On December 23rd, 2014, the National Reserve Bank of Angola issued a 20 Kwanzaa coin in tribute to her, saying, quote, "In recognition of her role to defend self-determination and cultural identity of her people," end quote. Movies and TV series have been inspired by her. Most recently, the 2023 Netflix docudrama African Queen Nzinga, which chronicles her life through dramatized historical reenactments. Oh my god. Oh, that was really hard. I think I did it okay though. Okay, there's the story of Nzinga, a very stubbornly awesome African queen who really just didn't let up against the Portuguese and the African slave trade. Quick little PS. Since I am on a work trip, I need to take a 2-week leave off of the channel. Mostly because my work is starting to pile on, and between that and this, I just can't make the time, and I don't want to start doing shortcuts to just get the videos out. I like to do my deep dive into the research and get the editing done and make it as interesting, entertaining, and as funny as I can to bring this to you guys. And all the time that I'm taking 2 weeks off of this, I'm still gonna be researching and filming when I can, so that then when around the 1st of next month starts, I am back fully and we got a whole lot of people to talk about. So with that, if you learned something today, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And while you're down there, please leave a friendly comment. I will be back in about 2 weeks with a new video. And until then, do not be well behaved. You just might make herstory. See you in 2 weeks, guys.